Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Thriving in Intersectionality podcast. My guest today is Dr. Maiysha Clairborne, and I am excited to dive into all of the things she brings into this conversation. Again, this is Thriving in Intersectionality, and the goal of this space is to share some of these people that are leading through multiple layers. And a lot of times we come into their world through their work. And I love to be able to take us back a couple of steps to how they got to where they are and some of the why behind why they do the work they do. So I love it. A lot of my guests, I am not familiar with them. I have just done some stalking. So I'm also excited to dive into this conversation with Dr. Maiysha. But before I go into that, I'd like to share a little bit about the word intersectionality. If you're not familiar with this, I came in through this word, through the work of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and she's done a lot of work around the Black women experience through social science research. And so I came into this word through our work. And so if you get a chance to check out, she's still very much doing the work around intersectionality. If you get a chance to take a look, start on YouTube, start on the website. She's done some amazing work. A couple of other leaders have explored intersections of different things like culture and gender, different pieces. I come in from a lens of immigrant identity, myself, and gender. And I have guests that, will share a little bit about different things. But here is a definition I like to lead with, though. Intersectionality is a framework that recognizes how multiple aspects of identity, such as race, gender, profession, context, lived experience, how all of these things uniquely overlap and interact for each person, creating experiences that might be privileged, or it might also be barriers the way we work and lead. And so it eludes the word by overgeneralizing it, but to give us a lens through which we understand the work that each person does. And so, of course, a lot of the people I have conversations with have got into that leadership stage. And so our conversations will be shaped to speak to individuals, but to also speak to corporate leaders who are responsible for making decisions about other people. And so that is a lot of talking on my side. I'm going to shift to my guest for today, a little bit about Dr. Maiysha. Dr. Maiysha Clairborne, MD, is an integrative physician, consultant, coach, trainer. She's also the founder of the Mind Remapping Company. She specializes in psychological safety and trauma-informed communication, and she helps organizations create environments where employees feel seen, heard, respected, and valued. She's a graduate of Emory University and Moore School of Medicine. Dr. Clairborne is also a sought-after speaker and has presented on multiple platforms, including TEDx. She's the author of The Wellness Blueprint and co-author of Conscious Anti-Racism. She's also the host of the Behind Beliefs, Behaviors, and the Brain podcast. So, as I said, she is doing a lot of things, but she didn't get there overnight, and that's what we're going to dive into today. Hi, Dr. Maiysha. How are you doing today?
I am doing so well, Dr. Lola. Thank you so much for having me. I love this conversation around intersectionality and everything that you've shared up to this point.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, let's get to know a little bit about you beyond the bio. When you think about the word intersectionality, what aspects of your identity and life experience maybe have most shaped the way you live and lead today?
Well, it's interesting as you were thinking about, as you were sharing about intersectionality, I was thinking about how there's so many layers of intersectionality that we don't see. And so, as a, of course, a woman, a Black woman, identifying, but then there's like neurodiversity, right? So like I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm also a mom, I'm a single mom, right? And so that's an intersection that a lot of people don't think about, right? I am a trauma survivor, child witness to domestic violence, but I also, I grew up in a middle class home. So like this is some privilege, right? Educated, at university and then have a higher education degree. So there's so many layers. But when I first started delving into my work in anti-racism, anti-oppression, when we did the wheel, I was actually surprised at how there were so many things that I was privileged, because we focus, at least in my experience, people with brown skin tend to focus on what we can see and what other people tend to see first and sometimes react to first. But I was pleasantly surprised to see where I was closer to the center of privilege, because it's empowering to recognize these are the ways that my voice matters, right? The other piece is I identify as a business owner and an entrepreneur rather than an employee, which actually is not as close to the center because there are barriers when you're, running your own business. So there's all these various layers I think about, but I will tell you the most recent one, and I mentioned it earlier, is being on that sort of neurodiverse spectrum. And it's something that I never really considered being highly sensitive until I did, only like a couple of years ago, that I recognized how much that impacts the way I walk into rooms, the way I lead from the front of the room, the way I am with large crowds. It's just something that the way I interact in conferences, the way I network, right? The way I am one-on-one with people, how I love to go deep. As an introvert, I think there's some overlap there as well. So there are a lot of things that I hadn't considered inside of this conversation of intersectionality that impact all of the work that I do and who I am with my son as well.
Yeah, I love it, and you touched on so many areas, and that's really the biggest part of this conversation, and why I always lead with that, especially because we do have the video aspect of this, so some people might be watching us on YouTube, but most people are listening to these, right? And I allow myself to go there too when I have my guests. Before I meet them, I try to think of what are they going to say, and then I am always surprised by the things, as you said, the invisible layers that we can't really know unless we get to know people.
That's right.
Hopefully that's the biggest takeaway that people will work with, right? Like, you could read somebody's bio, you could look at their name, you could see their picture and assume so many things without even being conscious of that. But if this is happening on the podcast, imagine the people on your team at work.
Yes. Yes. And it's one of the things I talk about so much. I talk about it in the context of our brains and communication, but it's so relevant to intersectionality, because we think about our brains and all the filters that information has to go through in order to be processed. And then when we speak and we're speaking to others, all the filters that it goes through just for us to get out the words and the communication that we want to get out, only to go through someone else's many, many filters, and then for them to respond through their filters. And so there are this piece of intersectionality I see as a filter. Like, our identities are various filters through which we speak, through which we listen, through which we interact. And just as you said, until we get to know one another and open the conversation, I like to say everything happens inside of communication. The moment you step into the room or log into a room, you're communicating. And so until we actually open those doors for communication, we can't learn all the filters, all the identities, who people are and what's important to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about, even you shared about looking at the wheel. So I do a workshop around intersectionality as well. And we feel, and all of the things that when we start to talk about intersectionality, sometimes people think, oh, this is not really for me. We're talking about Black and brown people.
Right.
But I could have somebody that looks exactly like me, and our intersections are very different. Our privilege and power areas are very
Mhm.
different. And, you know, when I first started having this conversation, of course, most of my guests end up being women, black, brown, but I also have
Mhm.
had white men on this conversation multiple times.
Yeah.
And so being okay to like be curious about the layers that people bring to the
Mhm.
intersectional topic beyond what we see, is
Yes.
really important.
And sometimes we can be mistaken in the identities. For example, I mean, I don't know how old you are. I'm not going to ask, but most people would look at me and they would think I'm of a certain generation. But I'm Gen X, proudly 51. And so, and I am often mistaken for being younger, which means people interact with me like I'm younger, right? Especially in corporate spaces. I am also 5'1". You can't see that on the screen, but being short and looking young comes with it a particular response, right? And so until I start to actually speak, people people will have a particular um, they will have formed an opinion about me before the words come out of my mouth. So again, some of these are visible, but some of them are invisible, and we don't often talk about in that wheel or that intersectionality. The age is on there, but like the generational piece is relevant. It's actually I think it's fun to talk about, as
Yeah.
in this context, because you can break some molds and some perceptions.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I kind of like, this is the first part of the conversation. I love to like give time for us to just dive into these and get your input on it. Um, Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you just for your openness to chat. I am a millennial, and I think being a millennial in the workforce also came with a lot of perceptions. And so I am used to thinking of age a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
because as millennials, we also got to get in, we got into the workforce with multiple older generations, and being the
Yes.
youngest and kind of understanding some of the way people perceived you. There's always the
Mm-hmm.
label and the stigma around being a millennial.
Yes.
Um, but somebody recently was talking to me about how, and I agreed with it, how millennials are translator generation because we were raised by traditional parents, and so we
Yes.
know values. We appreciate that perspective, and
Yes.
we're also raising Gen Z. So
Yes.
in this very interesting middle of, okay, I see your point.
All
I see
right.
how you guys are so excited, and I understand how it's so foreign to you that we
Yeah.
appreciate
Yeah.
steady
Mm-hmm.
and grounded values in the work. So it's helping to translate some of these generational differences
Mm-hmm.
and appreciate the fact that it's yes hand, it's not either or. We all
Absolutely.
bring hand into the workplace when we have this conversation. So, all
Yeah.
right, Dr. Maisha, let's talk a little bit about your journey, your career journey. You have a beautiful blend and mix of experiences, and I want to ask a little bit if you could walk us through your educational and professional journey. Before we talk about your work, this is the
Yeah.
part where I want to understand a little bit of how did you get here? Even maybe as far back as some early choices and then maybe key transition moments that you had in your career.
Absolutely. Well, I think I've always sort of gone against the grain as it pertains to my career, but I'll even take it back a little further. So my parents are healthcare parents. My mom's a retired dentist. My dad's a retired physician. And so I was exposed to it as at a very young age. I would like to think I chose it of my own volition in the 8th grade when I was doing a writing assignment. I just decided, I think I'm going to be a doctor. There was no rhyme or reason to it. but but what I will say is when I was in college, I got introduced to yoga and I started to be introduced to like more esoteric healing methods, energy work, things of that nature, and it really opened me up to something different. I started to think about what getting to the root cause of illness was like. And my undergraduate degree was also in psychology, so that's how I kind of fell in love with the brain and behavior. I remember taking abnormal psychology class, and this was when I first entered college. I was a chemistry major because if you were pre-med, you were either going to be a biology major, a physics major, or a chemistry major. I didn't have any other context in that, but I wasn't doing too great in chemistry. I didn't like it that much. And so I said, let me try this psychology class. And there was something about understanding the abnormalities of how we think. And I think part of it being raised in being a survivor of watching domestic violence or witnessing domestic violence, I think that kind of drew me in, trying to understand why people would act the way that they act in that way. And so that drew me in. And then the next class I took was behavioral psychology. And as I started to learn about classical conditioning and operant conditioning, Pavlov's dogs, and I was like, this is the key to human behavior. And I think that from that piece, I was drawn in. Going to medical school, graduating from medical school, I always knew that my path would be different. I went to traditional MD pathway because I felt like I didn't know how, but I needed to integrate in the natural, what they used to call alternative methods of healing into the traditional path. And that's exactly what I did. I became an acupuncturist. I certified as a coach. I learned hypnosis and deep emotional release work. I learned a lot about herbal medicine, food as medicine, lifestyle medicine. And this was back before this was commonplace. This was back when it was strange. And so I think like that kind of explains like my mindset. I always do things, say things, think about things before the general public is saying them, doing them, thinking about them, which kind of makes the path arduous at times, because when you're doing things that people don't understand, then they label it as something else, right? And so trailblazing is a double-edged sword.
I know it looks nice and shiny down the road, but I know the path as you are on the journey itself, it's not always as easy, and that's also something worth sharing and diving into in these spaces. Because it's never a straight path.
Yeah. So about 5 years into clinical practice, I started to feel this itch that there was something more. I mean, I loved being an integrative medicine physician. I loved people would come to me from their regular doctors and say, you know what, I don't feel like I'm being heard. I've got this thing going on, and I would talk to them about diet. I would talk to them about lifestyle. I would talk to them about stress. I would really question them in a way that would bring up other issues that maybe would not have been brought up in the traditional medical visit. And so I really loved that. But at some point I thought, well, is this it? Like, it's just, one-on-one patient care. Is that it? And what I realized is that I wanted something bigger. And then I had one of my patients was a physician, and she was burned out. And I coached her through this burnout, and I realized, oh, this is it, the coaching piece. And if I could help my colleagues, how many more patients could I help? And so that was actually my first transition out of clinical medicine, moving into physician wellness. I started to do some speaking from there, doing a lot of coaching, and then I gave up clinical practice to be a full-time coach, physician coach and speaker and facilitator in hospitals and healthcare organizations. And then the pandemic hit. And we all know what happened when the pandemic hit. And so that was around the time that I put my social justice hat on and faced that forward. And that's why I stepped into the anti racism work. Now, up to this point, I had this background in neurolinguistic programming, in psychology, and in medicine. So I had these three different contexts, and we were doing anti racism training in mostly healthcare settings. But what I brought to the trainings was this bridge between understanding and application. So people would understand what bias was, what the characteristics of white supremacism, of oppression were. They would understand intersectionality as a concept. But what they were afraid of was saying something wrong. And so what I would teach them is, well, how do you listen and observe and notice when you might have said something that takes a person aback? What do you say in those moments? How do you repair when harm happens? So and what are the things not to say, maybe? And I found such joy in that, because I would see, when you're in front of the room, and I know you know this, right, as a facilitator, as a consultant, when the light bulb comes on, you can just see it in their faces. You can see it in the body language. And I was getting it in those moments. And those were the moments that I loved the most. And so it occurred to me that communication, building trust, building safety, those are universal things. And I didn't want them to be just relegated to the anti-racism, anti-oppression atmosphere. And so what I took it on the road and deepened and developed my curriculum and began doing that facilitation inside of other organizations. And like you, I've worked with ERG. I think I got my start probably with ERG groups. ERG, they're always hungry for for more. Yeah. Yes. So I did a lot of, speaking around psychological safety inside of ERG groups, and then, delved into healthcare. And now I'm in the space of clinician leaders and non-clinical leaders doing group cohorts, taking them through the communication curriculum, expanding emotional intelligence, helping them to connect to their own selves and their own survival responses as an access to be able to deepen the empathy and connection in their communications with others. So that's sort of like the pathway to now. It's been a windy pathway, and I absolutely love what I do.
I know. And I think as you were talking, what I was thinking of is also the frustration sometimes with, oh my gosh, do I really know what I'm doing? I'm doing this. And just the patience to stay consistent in what you're doing. As you
Yes.
said, everything is going to come together in a way that is uniquely yours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it might not be as obvious now. It's like, I mean, I came from corporate America as well. And I always struggled when I was in corporate America with that. What
Yeah.
is my title? I felt like I didn't fit into my title. I
Mm-hmm.
felt like
Mm-hmm.
I was much more than a title, but it felt like the only parts available for me were title driven, right? Okay, so
Yes.
to be a manager, the next thing is to be a director, okay, and then VP, okay, next 10 years. Those titles
Yeah.
felt so empty, and it felt like I couldn't really quite capture like all the things I was interested in. And I thought something was wrong with me. I was like, why can't you just be
Yeah.
okay? So I love what you're saying about all of the interest, all of the things you took even with classes, and how it's shaping
Mm-hmm.
up right now in the work that you're doing.
Yes. And like you said, I mean, it is, along the way, I felt like a lot of the pathways that I took, I was led to, I was called to. It wasn't really it wasn't a decision that I made each moment. It was more I was called to each path, and then I made the decision from being called to it. And it wasn't. It was like very. There was a lot of unclarity along the way that was nerve wracking, right? When I would get to a path and I'd be like, "This is it. I love coaching. That's what I'm gonna do. I love physician wellness. That's it." And then I'd hear this, like, I call it my God voice, right? Like higher power, be like, "But wait, there's more." And
It's
I'd be
more.
like, more? you know, and and then I'd start to like follow that path, and there's so much unclarity, and I'd be like, "Are you sure, God? Like, are you sure I'm supposed to be doing this?" And then higher power's like, "Yes, yes." And
Yes.
then as I continue to like, been a big faith walk, you know,
Mm,
like I continue to listen and put my foot in front of the other, and ask colleagues, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? I have one of the things I will say is that the biggest gift to me in this journey has been community, has been
mm,
connecting with people like you, with people who share similar spaces, who have been generous enough to listen and for me to pass ideas by and say, okay, you know, what are your thoughts about this? Or is this something that you think there's a need for? Even when I've talked to leaders in organizations, I'll be like, yeah, this is what I'm thinking about. What do you think about this? Who have been generous enough to provide enough feedback, which I think was higher power kind of saying, yes, girl, you're on the right track.
yeah. And that's one thing I've realized too, is that you will get those moments and those reminders that even when you feel very uncomfortable, you will get
Hmm.
those specs that remind you, oh yeah, I am on the right path. This is,
Yes.
keep going. It might be through people. I have a mentor of mine that it would like I might not have spoken to him for weeks, but out of the blue, sometimes I will be like feeling that, oh my gosh, what am I doing?
Hmm.
Doing? And he will just drop a note, a
Mm.
simple note.
Hmm.
And the timing is always right. I might be
Yes.
in the moment, like in my feelings, and then I'll get a note, Lola, I am so proud of you. I
Oh.
love what you're doing. And it lands differently when it's people that know you, that have known
Hmm.
you, when they
Hmm.
give you compliments. It's not people that are new to your space, right? And
Yes.
so I think those I'm a Christian. I'm also purpose driven and faith driven part of my work.
Yes.
But
Hmm.
I think it's there's a lot of discomforts that people don't see.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, we keep going. I am so excited to myself personally dive into some of the things that you're doing. I know we're not going to have a lot of time to go into all that today. For anyone listening that want to follow your work and learn more about your work, where can they find that?
Well, so you can start by listening to my podcast, Beliefs, Behaviors, Communication in the Brain, and this is a good place for you to kind of really get to know me from a personal standpoint. I talk a lot, learn about the work that I do. I talk a lot about uh, emotional intelligence and psychological safety and communication, and but I talk about it in the space of storytelling, and so you get to know me, but you also get to know the work that I do. If you want to read a little bit more about the work that I do, you can go to my website. It's mindremappingacademy.com, mindremappingacademy.com. And you're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Substack. Yes, I am on Instagram and Facebook, but I'm mostly on LinkedIn and Substack. That's mostly where I am from a social media standpoint. Um, YouTube, I'm on YouTube as well, and all of those are / Dr. Maiysha. And then finally, check out the TEDx talk. That'll give you some.
Yep, lots
Yeah.
of great resources. So if you're listening, all of those things that Dr. Maisha mentioned will be linked in the show notes. But connect with her on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll find the links for that. I would also pull up the podcast, our podcast as well, so you can follow our work, because definitely deeper than all the things that we can capture here, because I know you talk about psychological safety, emotional
Hmm.
intelligence, the
Yes.
communication lens, and your
Hmm.
perspective is really unique again because of the journey that you have taken to
Hmm.
doing this work. The trauma
Yeah.
informed brain science, medical science part of it. I
Hmm.
think those layers make the work you're doing very unique in that space.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so a little bit of final cheer for anyone that is listening, and I want to make that two parts. So first, for individuals, um, I know your intersections personally have definitely shaped the way
Hmm.
work that you do today, and that's been very clear from our conversation today. But What advice do you have for anyone who's kind of listening to your intersections, and maybe they feel connected, or maybe they are struggling with some experiences of kind of decisions right now? What wisdom would you offer someone whose identity or lived experiences have shaped where they are, and maybe they are learning to trust their voice right now?
Mm. Yes. Well, I mean, trusting their voice like that. Those last three words are gold. I think that excuse me. I think that oftentimes when we have those spaces that feel like those spaces of insecurity, they come from past wounds. I encourage people to start to dive into where some of that insecurity or where some of that fear or even distrust of oneself comes from, and learn your story, recognizing that it is a past story and that you have the power to make up a new story. And the second thing I would say, I recently said to a client, was let your those intersections, lean into them as your superpowers. Lean into them as your superpowers. As a tested introvert in an extroverted world, one of the things I often say is like, I love being an introvert because it gives me a different kind of listening and a different kind of way to interact with the world. And so lean into those things that maybe others might turn their head at. Lean into them as superpowers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love it. And I was thinking of animals as you were talking,
Yes.
because
Yes.
how we talk about animals and their sense of smell.
Yeah.
Certain animals, maybe their sight
Yeah.
is not as good, but their sense of smell is
Yes.
super sharp, and that's how they protect themselves. And
Hmm.
and so I was comparing that to what you were saying is
Yeah.
our uniqueness gives some other senses different hyper sensitivity, and so we bring something different to conversations, and
Hmm.
some of our other senses are quickened in a different
Hmm.
way than other people. So I love that.
Yes.
All right. So the second part of my final wisdom question is going to be for organization. So I know you've also worked with organizations in the ERG space, and so maybe something that you wish leaders knew better, or something that if anyone is listening now who is a people manager or a
Hmm.
leader responsible for decision within an organization, is there anything you would like to share with them as a takeaway or something to keep in mind as they lead people?
Yeah, I feel like I really wish that leaders would know and embrace the power of modeling fallibility and vulnerability. Like we do, as leaders, you do not have to know everything. And when you model your humanity, when you allow your humanity to show, it creates that safety for others to be able to be human, and then they will be feel safe and trust telling you things that maybe they were holding, that you could support them in, that would help them grow and help them thrive, and then ultimately help the team and the division of the department grow and thrive. And so modeling your own humanity, that is, I think, one of the big keys to building trust and safety in a team or a group, and especially in organizations.
Yeah, I like that. I think a lot of times, we're in the world where there's so many things that everyone has an advice on what you should do, like do this,
Hmm.
do stuff,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
we forget the power of just the inner work that you need to do and what
Yes.
you need to model, right? You can't be everything to everybody.
Hmm.
There's a ton of rules. There's so many different people within your
Hmm.
team. You might not be
That's
able
right.
to empathize
Yes.
with every single person, but if you stay vulnerable, as you said, model something that
Hmm.
opens them up to trusting you more,
Yeah.
and it will
Absolutely.
be a lot better. Yeah. And it's not soft fluffy stuff. It's actually good business decision.
Yes. Oh man. I have to tell I tell people all the time, emotions are data. Emotions are data. It is
Yeah.
not a soft skill. It is an essential skill.
Yeah. Yeah. It is essential. And I worked in biotech, and it was always and I had somebody who was a bench scientist. This was early on, who made that comment like, you know, I am the lifeblood of this organization. Like, my science and my innovation is what keeps us active, what makes us money. And basically trying to say anybody that is not a scientist is irrelevant. Was the
Mm-hmm.
argument this person was trying to make. And I remembered, because this was early in my career, and I was kind of struggling with that, right? Like, what is, we might have 70% scientists,
Mm-hmm.
but you sit in the lab making products all the time. That doesn't make the company successful.
Right, right. You can make the products, but if they're not connecting to the people who buy them, forget about
Yes,
it.
forget about it. So, there's no person is irrelevant when it comes to that whole supply chain.
Yes,
Everyone has a role to play, and everyone is important. So,
that's right.
uh, yeah. Anyway, the old numbers, like business goals, where our money goes, where
Mm-hmm.
where I was very involved with ERGs earlier on, and I had a manager is like, oh, we don't have time for all of that in this department. We got to make money. I know you're very involved in that. Ooh, I was so triggered. This was a new manager, and I was like, oh my gosh, how can a manager say that to me? Somebody who has
Mm-hmm.
been with the company for years and who just
Yeah.
joined your team, to say,
Mm-hmm.
well, all that stuff that you're involved in, we don't have time for that in this department. We're very
Wow.
busy, like making the company actual money. I was
Mm.
like, wow, okay. I could tell I wasn't going to like working for that team, but
Yeah, it's like let's see how that
oh
goes.
my gosh. All right. Yeah. All right. Well, before I go to my last question, my signature question, is there anything else you would like to share as we wrap up this conversation with my audience?
I think that we've covered it quite well. I think one of the things that I like to impress is the power of community. Community is
Mm,
so important in as we thrive because we have all these intersections, but at the end of the day, we all bleed red. And so, like, really leaning into each other as community and nurturing that human connection, I think that is just so important in organizations, particularly where they are starting to silo people out. It is that the sense of community that actually feeds people's souls. Much to I think that there's a word that some menopause, um, contrary, contrary to popular belief. Community and fun and laughter, those are the things that fuel productivity.
mm, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I love it. Well, find your people.
Find your people.
Yes. Thank you. So my last question is a fun one. If you were to share a meal with your coworkers, what would you pick and why?
What meal would I pick? Ooh, that's a good question. I like so many things. I think that if I were to share a meal with my coworkers, I think I would do fondue. I haven't done fondue in a while, but fondue is one of those fun meals where it is family style.
Yeah.
And who doesn't like a good family style where you're dipping everything in cheese or
Or
chocolate?
chocolate.
Or chocolate or chocolate where you have your marshmallows and chocolate or strawberries and chocolate or bread and vegetables and cheese. I love fondue. I think it's super fun. It can be messy, but that's okay because I think that's life. And
Mm,
when we can not take ourselves so seriously, we dip something,
right.
it falls on the table or on the napkin or
Right.
sometimes on our shirt. you know, we can go
Yeah.
home and clean up later.
Yeah. Yep. There's beauty in the messiness, and
Yes.
and the shared laughter that's built over that, and that, it's very unique. But thank you for sharing that. I love fondue. I don't think anybody has ever said fondue. But I can tell where that's also coming from, knowing you, and I always connect the answer to the person and the
Right.
conversation we just had, and I think that represents what I feel from you a lot. Thank you for the work you do, Dr. Maiysha. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing your insights beautifully and for being a guest on this show. For
Thank you, Dr. Lola.
anyone listening, if you have any looking to share any feedback, just check at the bottom of the show notes. You can share feedback specifically about these. We're set up to get fan mails now, so I'd love to hear your thoughts about what resonated with you with this conversation. And don't forget to follow Dr. Maiysha Clairborne if you are on LinkedIn, especially. Looking forward to feedback about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lola, for having me, and for the listeners, because of course we all know without the listeners, there's no podcast.
Yes. Thank you.